On 14th of March 1997, passengers aboard the TGV express train bound for Lyon from Paris witnessed what seemed at first an ordinary journey through the rolling French countryside. By evening, whispers spread through the carriages that a Middle Eastern man had been found lifeless in his seat, his eyes wide open but unseeing. That man was Ibrahim Khobani, a Hamas explosives engineer long hunted by intelligence agencies across 3 continents. His sudden death was not only unexpected, but inexplicably clean. No gunshots, no struggle, no commotion. Just the eerie stillness of a life ending in motion, surrounded by unsuspecting travelers. Authorities arrived at the next station to discover Khobani slumped against the window, ticket still in hand, a briefcase at his feet. French investigators, initially baffled, treated it as a possible heart attack. But the man's reputation preceded him. Khobani was no ordinary passenger. For Mossad, Israel's feared intelligence service, he was the architect of bomb designs that had leveled buses, markets, and cafes in Tel Aviv. For Hamas, he was a prized asset, the elusive genius of detonation. His end on a speeding train demanded explanation. What invisible hands had orchestrated this? Was this natural fate, or the precision of an assassin's art? The TGV that evening had become more than transport. It had become a theater of shadows, its quiet hum masking the silent choreography of espionage. The question echoing across intelligence circles was chilling. Had Mossad finally caught its phantom, mid-journey, in plain sight? The death of Ibrahim Khobani reverberated far beyond the polished aisles of the French high-speed train. To Israel, his silence marked the removal of a man whose blueprints had given birth to bombs that carved scars across its cities. To Hamas, it was a devastating blow to their clandestine workshops, stripping them of the engineer who could transform raw chemicals into terror weapons with ruthless efficiency. France, suddenly the unwilling stage for this covert drama, faced uncomfortable questions. How had a Palestinian militant turned most wanted fugitive ended his journey not in Gaza, but in a first-class compartment speeding through Burgundy? The stakes could not have been higher. If Mossad had indeed executed this strike, it meant Israel's reach extended seamlessly across borders, trampling diplomatic sensitivities with impunity. If it had not, then another intelligence service, perhaps rival Arab agencies or even Western allies, had carried out a hit that risked igniting new firestorms in the Middle East. Every possibility pointed toward an escalation. In Washington, analysts scrambled to assess whether the operation had been coordinated with American knowledge. In Damascus and Tehran, leaders studied the headlines for signs of a breach within Hamas's protective networks. In Tel Aviv, the silence was deliberate, the message subtle. Enemies of Israel could be touched anywhere, even amid the comfort of Europe's most modern train. The killing, whether denied or confirmed, shifted the balance. The battlefield had suddenly expanded, and nowhere felt beyond the invisible reach of shadow wars. Who boarded that train with intent not of travel, but of execution? Was it a lone operative slipping into a reserved seat, armed not with a pistol, but with a vial of poison or a concealed syringe? Did Khobani lock eyes in his final moments with the very figure sent to erase him? Or was the death engineered remotely, triggered by a device hidden within his own briefcase, sabotaged by hands he trusted? Why now? Why in France, far from the deserts of Gaza and the labyrinth of Tel Aviv? Was it a calculated message to European governments, a reminder that neutrality is an illusion when terror and counter-terror cross their borders? Was it timed to cripple Hamas at a crucial juncture, when talks, weapon smuggling, and rising attacks were converging into a single volatile storm? And most haunting of all, who gave the order? A shadowy committee in Tel Aviv, poring over dossiers with surgical precision. Rivals within Hamas itself, eliminating a genius whose ambition threatened their control, or a secret alignment of powers that found temporary harmony in his demise. The train reached its destination. But for Ibrahim Khobani, the journey ended in questions that linger still. Ibrahim Khobani was born in the early 1960s in Khan Yunis, a crowded refugee camp in the southern Gaza Strip. His family, displaced during the upheavals of 1948, lived in a one-room cinder-block dwelling with corrugated iron roofing that baked under the Mediterranean sun. From childhood, The sound of military convoys and the sight of watchtowers punctuated his reality, each reminder a daily lesson in powerlessness and survival. The scarcity of clean water, the rationing of flour, and the rhythm of curfews formed the backdrop of his earliest memories. His father, once a farmer, earned meager wages as a laborer in Israel, often gone for weeks at a time. His mother, illiterate but sharp, instilled in him a quiet discipline, urging education as the family's only possible escape. Ibrahim excelled in mathematics at the UN-run school, scribbling equations on scraps of cardboard when notebooks were unaffordable. Teachers noted his strange patience with numbers, his ability to visualize formulas like puzzles waiting to be solved. The boy who rarely spoke in class seemed to come alive when faced with calculations. By adolescence, he was already viewed as different, more introspective, less prone to playground brawls, yet prone to staring for hours at dismantled radios and broken appliances. He would rebuild them with missing parts, improvising with wires stripped from discarded batteries. Neighbors whispered about the boy's uncanny focus, the way he could turn debris into devices that worked, at least for a while. In Gaza, where deprivation was normal, such resourcefulness seemed almost magical. Tragedy shadowed his formative years. An older cousin was killed in a border clash, an event that deepened his family's bitterness and marked Ibrahim with a sense of unfinished justice. The boy who once dreamed of becoming an engineer abroad began to view his gift not merely as a ticket to opportunity, but as a weapon in waiting. His journey from refugee camp prodigy to hunted bomb maker was still decades away, yet the conditions of his youth, poverty, exile, humiliation, etched the outlines of the man he would become. Every calculation in his notebooks carried with it the imprint of conflict, the silent mathematics of survival and vengeance. As Ibrahim Khobani matured, his intellectual brilliance fused with a growing ideological conviction. The teachings of Islam, filtered through the turbulent politics of Gaza, became more than spiritual comfort. They became a framework through which he interpreted injustice and oppression. Unlike others in his neighborhood who turned immediately to street protests, Ibrahim cultivated a philosophy of patience and precision. He believed battles were won not through noise, but through design. His notebooks shifted from equations to diagrams of circuits, fuses, and timers, an evolution of mathematics into the mechanics of resistance. Despite his alignment with Hamas, Khobani was not the firebrand speaker or charismatic recruiter often associated with militant leaders. Instead, he was reserved, methodical, almost ascetic in his habits. He ate little, often subsisting on tea, olives, and flatbread. He carried prayer beads that clicked softly in his hand, but colleagues noticed he sometimes paused mid-chant to sketch ideas for detonators on the backs of envelopes. His mind never fully rested. Among peers, he was notorious for an obsessive neatness. Wires had to be color-coded, tools aligned with military precision, notebooks stacked without a page out of place. One comrade recalled entering his workshop and finding him enraged over a single screw misplaced. His obsession with detail, both personal and professional, gave him a reputation of being unflappable, until order was disturbed. This combination of discipline, religious devotion, and compulsive perfectionism created a man who could design devices that never failed, while leaving little trace of his presence. Within Hamas's ranks, Ibrahim Khobani acquired nicknames that reflected both admiration and fear. Some called him the Engineer's Shadow, a nod to Yahya Ayyash, the legendary bomb maker whose death in 1996 left a vacuum that Khobani was expected to fill. Others referred to him simply as the watchmaker, for his uncanny ability to assemble devices with the meticulous patience of a craftsman tinkering with gears. Among Israeli intelligence reports, he appeared as Spectre, a figure whose movements were never fully confirmed, whose identity hovered between rumor and dossier. Khobani himself rarely used titles. In rare conversations with close associates, he described his work as balance, a response to Israeli firepower that, in his mind, justified the explosions tearing through Tel Aviv buses. He considered himself neither soldier nor scientist, but something in between, an architect of equilibrium through destruction. While leaders in Hamas celebrated martyrdom, Khobani shunned the limelight, preferring anonymity. His self-image was not of a warrior charging into battle, but of a mathematician correcting an equation, one bomb at a time. For him, precision was power, invisibility was armor, and the devices he crafted were extensions of his quiet, obsessive identity. The transformation of Ibrahim Khobani from gifted tinkerer to militant engineer did not occur overnight. In his early 20s, he left Gaza briefly to study engineering in Jordan, where his exposure to exiled Palestinian circles deepened his political awareness. There, he encountered members of the Muslim Brotherhood, whose lectures framed armed resistance not as criminality, but as sacred duty. For a young man shaped by refugee camp hardship, their words fused seamlessly with his own lived reality. The equations of mathematics now intersected with the rhetoric of jihad, and Khobani began to view his technical gift as a divine obligation. Returning to Gaza in the mid-1980s, he entered a society simmering with unrest. The First Intifada erupted in 1987, and what began as stone-throwing soon demanded more sophisticated methods of resistance. Khobani, already adept at building crude devices, found himself recruited into Hamas's embryonic military wing. At first, his role was advisory, designing small charges used against patrols, but his talent was quickly recognized. Leaders saw in him not merely another fighter, but a rare commodity, a disciplined mind capable of creating consistency in chaos. This transition was not without hesitation. Family members recall his initial reluctance, his awareness that involvement meant forfeiting any chance of a normal career. Yet every funeral, every demolished home, eroded that hesitation. By the early 1990s, Khobani was no longer on the margins of the movement. He was its hidden asset, the quiet architect who ensured that Hamas's devices detonated on schedule, leaving behind a trail of fire and headlines. The boy who once fixed broken radios had crossed an invisible threshold. His craft was now weaponized, and his life had become inseparable from the escalating violence of a region spiraling into perpetual conflict. To understand Ibrahim Khobani's trajectory, one must situate him within the wider conflict that shaped his generation. The struggle between Israelis and Palestinians was not merely territorial, but existential, rooted in narratives of displacement, survival, and competing claims to history. By the 1980s, Gaza had become a crucible of discontent, overcrowded, impoverished, and policed with relentless scrutiny. The Israeli occupation, marked by checkpoints, raids, and arrests, collided daily with the aspirations of a population that had never known sovereignty. Each clash bred new martyrs, each demolition forged new militants. The First Intifada signaled a turning point. What began with stones hurled by teenagers against armored jeeps grew into a coordinated uprising that unsettled Israel's hold on the territories. Hamas emerged during this period, offering both social services and armed resistance, positioning itself as an alternative to the secular Palestine Liberation Organization. For young men like Khobani, Hamas provided not only a political vehicle, but also a sense of belonging to something larger than personal survival. Meanwhile, Israel's own fears were intensifying. Suicide bombings and improvised explosives, still in their infancy, posed asymmetric threats to a state that prided itself on military superiority. Each attack sparked harsher crackdowns, raids, and targeted arrests. The cycle fed itself, with retaliation answering retaliation, until the line between defense and revenge blurred into irrelevance. Beyond Gaza, the broader Middle East was a chessboard of shifting alliances. The Gulf War of 1991 reconfigured loyalties, while the Oslo Accords of the mid-1990s promised peace, but delivered disillusionment when settlements expanded and violence persisted. Into this volatile equation stepped figures like Khobani, men whose skills could tilt the balance of fear. For Israel, neutralizing him was not simply about eliminating one man. It was about disrupting the architecture of terror itself, a structure built with wires, timers, and ideology. For Hamas, his survival meant retaining a symbol of ingenuity under siege. The case of Ibrahim Khobani cannot be separated from the tangle of nations orbiting the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, each state projecting its interests onto the battlefield of Gaza. For Israel, Khobani symbolized the convergence of science and terror, a lethal synthesis that demanded eradication. Officials in Tel Aviv framed him as more than a bomb maker. He was described in internal memos as a strategic multiplier, capable of transforming scattered resentment into calibrated destruction. His existence justified Mossad's extraterritorial reach, its quiet doctrine that enemies could not be allowed safe haven anywhere. In contrast, Iran viewed men like Khobani as assets in a proxy struggle. Tehran's support for Hamas, both financial and technical, was no secret. Iranian operatives funneled training and components through Lebanon, enabling the very devices Khobani perfected. For Syria, long hosting exiled Hamas leadership, figures such as Khobani represented bargaining chips, useful in both regional posturing and leverage against Israel. Their support was less ideological than strategic, a way to maintain relevance in the shifting sands of Middle Eastern power. The West found itself divided. Washington publicly condemned Hamas while quietly monitoring Israel's covert campaigns. American intelligence was aware of targeted killings, but rarely intervened, adopting the stance of plausible deniability. European governments, meanwhile, walked a tightrope. France, where Khobani would ultimately meet his end, had long tolerated exiles and activists within its borders. Yet the assassination on its soil exposed the fragility of that posture, turning neutrality into humiliation. Egypt, sharing a volatile border with Gaza, maintained an ambivalent role. Cairo feared Hamas's Islamist ideology spilling into its own population, yet it also mediated truces when conflict threatened regional stability. Jordan, where Khobani once studied, expelled Hamas leaders when their activities endangered its delicate balance with Israel. Each country's position formed a layer of pressure upon Khobani's life. To some, he was a symbol of resistance; to others, a destabilizing force to be extinguished. His movements, his safe houses, even his travels abroad were shadowed by the geopolitical calculations of capitals far removed from Gaza's dust. He was, in essence, both a man and a marker in a larger, ruthless game of states. Ibrahim Khobani mattered not because he commanded armies or delivered fiery speeches, but because he embodied the fusion of intellect and insurgency. In conflicts defined by asymmetry, where one side wielded advanced jets and tanks while the other relied on smuggling tunnels and crude devices, men like Khobani leveled the field. His talent transformed everyday materials, fertilizer, alarm clocks, mobile phones, into weapons of calculated devastation. This ingenuity gave Hamas a lethal edge, making him indispensable and irreplaceable. For Hamas's leadership, Khobani was a hidden crown jewel. His devices ensured operations did not fail, and his teachings multiplied his influence by training younger engineers. Each successful detonation amplified his myth, spreading whispers that the watchmaker could turn silence into thunder without ever being seen. His presence was less about charisma and more about reliability, a guarantee that their war machine functioned with mechanical precision. For Israel, that reliability was intolerable. Each bus explosion in Jerusalem or Tel Aviv bore his signature, invisible yet undeniable. Intelligence analysts traced patterns of circuitry that matched his designs, leading Mossad to label him a force magnifier. Removing him was not only about vengeance for lives lost, but about dismantling the infrastructure of future attacks. He was seen not as a man, but as a system, one whose elimination would ripple across Hamas's operational capacity. Internationally, Khobani became a symbol of the evolving nature of terrorism in the late 20th century. No longer were militants merely masked gunmen firing rifles. They were engineers, chemists, and technicians, blending academia with warfare. His case illustrated how fragile the boundary was between university laboratories and clandestine workshops. To intelligence services, he represented the nightmare scenario, a man whose brilliance, if redirected, might have contributed to scientific progress, but instead constructed engines of destruction. In this sense, Khobani mattered because he epitomized the modern militant intellectual. His death on a French train was not merely an isolated assassination, but the elimination of a dangerous archetype, one whose mind was as deadly as any weapon he might build. The first traces of Ibrahim Khobani's militant career appeared in the late 1980s, as the first intifada gripped Gaza and the West Bank. Initially, his involvement was limited to constructing small homemade charges for use against Israeli patrols. These early devices were crude, pipes stuffed with improvised mixtures, ignited by matches or basic timers. Yet even at this stage, Khobani's precision stood out. While others struggled with faulty fuses, his bombs detonated as planned, signaling the emergence of a methodical craftsman in a chaotic environment. Israeli security services soon began to take notice. By 1989, informants identified him as part of a clandestine cell responsible for several explosions near military outposts. An Israeli raid in Khan Yunis led to his first arrest. Interrogation records from that period describe him as unshakably calm, refusing to speak beyond confirming his name. Despite limited evidence, he spent several months in detention, an experience that hardened him further. Released under international pressure, Khobani returned to Gaza with renewed determination. His second arrest came in 1992, after a warehouse explosion revealed caches of wires, batteries, and chemical precursors. Yet the evidence once again fell short of a conviction, and he was released. Each brush with the law seemed only to refine his methods, teaching him the weaknesses of surveillance and the vulnerabilities of intelligence networks. By the mid-1990s, Khobani had become a ghost-like figure, moving between safe houses, rarely staying more than a few nights in one location. His reputation grew in whispers: the engineer who never erred, the quiet man who left explosions in his wake. The cycle of arrest and release only amplified his mystique, transforming him from a local craftsman into a legend within Gaza's underground. Khobani's time in Israeli detention became a crucible that shaped both his ideology and his legend. Accounts from fellow prisoners describe interrogations that stretched for days, punctuated by bright lights, sleep deprivation, and relentless questioning about his alleged role in explosives design. Some later claimed he endured physical abuse, beatings designed to break his resolve. Whether all the stories were true or embellished by myth, one fact remained consistent: Khobani never confessed. Within prison walls, his silence earned him admiration. Younger inmates began to view him as a model of endurance, a man who turned suffering into discipline. According to testimonies, he spent hours sketching imaginary blueprints in the air with his fingers, as if his mind was elsewhere, locked on circuits rather than confinement. To guards, this detachment appeared cold. To his comrades, it was proof of unshakable conviction. Upon release, whispers spread that Khobani had emerged stronger, more determined, and more inventive. The torture claims fueled his symbolic stature, casting him not merely as an engineer but as a survivor of oppression. Each story amplified his aura, transforming him from technician to folk hero within militant circles. Following his release from detention in the early 1990s, Ibrahim Khobani fully embedded himself in Hamas's military wing, the Izz ad-Din al-Qassam brigades. While he had flirted with activism before, prison transformed him into a committed operative. Hamas leaders recognized his technical skill as indispensable. They offered him not the battlefield, but the workshop, a quieter, yet far more consequential arena of war. Khobani began training small groups of recruits, teaching them how to assemble detonators, conceal explosives in vehicles, and craft timers from ordinary household devices. His lessons were meticulous, almost academic. Students recalled him standing over diagrams, insisting on exact measurements down to the millimeter. A single misplaced wire, he warned, could mean not only mission failure, but self-destruction. His precision became both doctrine and creed. There were rumors that Khobani entertained proposals of splintering off to form his own faction, perhaps a specialized engineering unit independent of Hamas command. Yet he never did. Instead, he remained loyal to the brigades, preferring the cover and resources of an established movement. This decision ensured his skills scaled upward, fueling increasingly sophisticated attacks that haunted Israeli security services. During this period, his role shifted from simple bomb-making to logistics. He coordinated smuggling routes through Sinai, worked with Lebanese intermediaries, and tested devices in secluded orchards. Israeli analysts later noted that his fingerprints, figuratively though never literally, appeared across multiple operations in the mid-1990s. In every case, the devices functioned flawlessly. The man who once experimented with broken radios had become the indispensable backbone of Hamas's terror infrastructure. His joining was less a recruitment than a merger of talent and ideology, a union that would make him one of the most hunted men of his generation. By the mid-1990s, Ibrahim Khobani's activities had expanded beyond the confines of the workshop. He became a central figure in Hamas's smuggling operations, orchestrating the movement of explosives and components through a labyrinth of tunnels beneath the Gaza-Egypt border. Israeli intelligence later noted that shipments of TNT, blasting caps, and even military-grade plastique were refined under his supervision. What once began as crude improvisation matured into a streamlined supply chain. Khobani's role was not limited to materials. He supervised kidnappings of collaborators suspected of working with Israel, designing holding cells in basements reinforced with steel doors and concealed passages. Interrogations of captives often ended in execution, their deaths serving as brutal warnings against betrayal. His engineering mind extended to these grim tasks. Escape-proof confinement became yet another equation to be solved. Killings linked to Khobani's designs spread fear deep into Israeli civilian life. Buses in Tel Aviv erupted into fireballs. Cafes in Jerusalem were torn apart by shrapnel. Investigators repeatedly found detonators that bore the hallmarks of his meticulous wiring, circuits trimmed to efficiency, timers shielded from malfunction. Each device became his invisible signature. These operations escalated Hamas's standing in the eyes of allies and adversaries alike. To supporters, Khobani's devices represented defiance against overwhelming Israeli firepower. To Israel, they symbolized precision-targeted chaos, striking at the soft underbelly of civilian life. As the body count mounted, Mossad dossiers on Khobani thickened. His name appeared not only in intelligence cables, but in cabinet briefings, whispered as a priority target. The smuggler had become more than an engineer. He was now a strategist of destruction, one whose actions blurred the line between battlefield tactics and outright terror. The chronology of Ibrahim Khobani's operations reads like a ledger of calculated terror. In January 1994, Israeli investigators tied him to a bombing in Afula that killed 8 and injured dozens. The device used a pressure-activated switch concealed beneath a bus seat, its precision timer traced back to circuitry unique to Khobani's designs. Though never publicly confirmed, intelligence analysts marked the incident as his first clear operational signature. Later that year, in July, a Tel Aviv cafe exploded during morning rush, killing 6. Forensic teams found the detonator unusually resistant to jamming devices. Mossad later concluded that Khobani had experimented with shielding techniques to prevent Israeli countermeasures. Each innovation represented a direct duel between his ingenuity and Israel's technology. By 1995, his reach extended to coordinated operations. An October bombing in Ashkelon used synchronized timers, detonating 2 charges within seconds of each other, maximizing panic and casualties. Surveillance footage suggested careful scouting, likely orchestrated by Khobani from the shadows. Perhaps most chilling was a 1996 Jerusalem bus attack, where the explosive composition revealed new levels of lethality. Chemical traces indicated imported material, confirming his growing role in smuggling networks. 26 people were killed, marking one of Hamas's deadliest strikes. For Israeli officials, the pattern was unmistakable. Wherever the watchmaker left his mark, devastation followed. Each incident tightened the noose around him, elevating his priority on Mossad's kill list. Each attack also elevated his myth within Hamas, who now saw him not only as a bomb maker, but as the hidden architect of terror campaigns that shook Israel to its core. By the late 1990s, Ibrahim Khobani's name was no longer whispered only in the alleys of Gaza or in the files of Hamas commanders. It had ascended into the crosshairs of global intelligence. In Tel Aviv, Shin, Bet and Mossad compiled exhaustive dossiers, marking him as one of the most dangerous operatives alive. His engineering fingerprints were detected across at least a dozen major attacks. His reputation for precision made him more feared than any gunman, because his devices extended terror beyond the battlefield into buses, markets, and schools. Israel formally designated him a high-value target in 1996, the same year Yahya Ayash, Hamas's original master bomb maker, was killed by a rigged cell phone. Analysts warned that Khobani's rise represented continuity, a seamless succession that nullified Israel's earlier victory. To eliminate him was not just vengeance, but a strategic necessity. International agencies soon followed suit. Interpol quietly circulated notices at Israel's request, citing him as wanted for acts of terrorism spanning multiple jurisdictions. American intelligence listed him as a figure of special concern, while European authorities, uneasy with hosting Palestinian exiles, added his name to restricted travel watch lists. His movements across borders became harder, yet his legend grew in proportion to the restrictions. Inside Hamas, Khobani's elevation to most wanted status only burnished his prestige. Fighters whispered of his ability to outwit surveillance, his near-mythical escapes from raids. In Gaza's underground, posters depicted him alongside Ayyash, presented as heirs in a lineage of resistance engineers. Every attempt to label him a criminal abroad transformed him into a hero at home. Yet, for Mossad, his notoriety simplified the mission. Khobani was no longer one fugitive among many. He was a centerpiece of Israeli counter-terror doctrine. His survival meant Hamas retained its lethal edge. His death would signal Israel's mastery over the clandestine war of brains and bombs. The campaign to eliminate Ibrahim Khobani began long before the fateful train ride through France. Mossad's archives, later revealed in fragments, suggest a pattern of failed or foiled operations stretching across several countries. Each attempt reflected both the desperation to silence him and the difficulty of cornering a man who lived in perpetual motion. The first known effort occurred in Gaza City in 1995. An apartment rigged with explosives detonated minutes after Khobani was expected to arrive for a clandestine meeting. A delay caused by a faulty taxi spared him, though 3 associates died instantly. Hamas portrayed the incident as divine intervention, further amplifying his aura of untouchability. In 1996, a Mossad cell allegedly tracked him to Amman, Jordan. There, agents tried to poison his toothpaste with a nerve agent, a method later attempted against Hamas leader Khaled Mashal. Khobani, however, switched apartments at the last moment, leaving the booby-trapped toiletries untouched. Jordanian intelligence quietly learned of the plot, heightening diplomatic tensions with Israel. A third attempt unfolded in 1997, when Israeli drones stalked his convoy in southern Lebanon. A missile strike was aborted at the last second due to the presence of civilians, a restraint that frustrated field operatives but reflected Tel Aviv's caution about collateral damage. Each failure emboldened Khobani. He adapted by changing safe houses nightly, traveling under multiple forged passports, and refusing to eat food he had not prepared himself. He grew paranoid, yet efficient, living by routines designed to foil surveillance. Yet Mossad's persistence never wavered. To them, each failed attempt was not defeat, but rehearsal. Every close call brought lessons, narrowing the margin for error. For Khobani, survival became both curse and blessing. He remained alive, but the shadow of hunters was constant. Friends later recalled how his conversations often drifted into silence, his eyes flicking to windows or doorways. He understood the inevitability of pursuit, yet carried on, tethered by ideology and the belief that destiny, not assassins, would decide his end. By the late 1990s, Ibrahim Khobani's life had become a slow-motion countdown. Each day of survival felt less like triumph and more like inevitability deferred. Within Hamas, comrades whispered that his destiny mirrored that of Yahya Ayyash, the slain engineer before him. Legends in their world rarely aged. They burned briefly, then were extinguished by precision strikes from unseen hands. Khobani himself seemed resigned. He altered routines obsessively, switching cars, altering routes, booking train tickets only minutes before departure. Yet friends noticed his weariness. He joked darkly that Mossad probably knew the brand of his tea before he bought it. The laughter never reached his eyes. Intelligence analysts in Tel Aviv described him as a walking dead man, a target whose elimination was considered a matter of timing rather than feasibility. The dossier against him had swollen with blueprints, intercepted communications, and testimonies of defectors. Each page tightened the circle, reducing his existence to an equation awaiting its final solution. When he boarded the TGV in March 1997, perhaps he sensed the symmetry, a life measured in seconds, circuits, and timers, ending in the one place no bomb could save him, from within the shadows that had stalked him for years. In the days before 14th of March 1997, a quiet choreography unfolded across Europe. Flights touched down at Charles de Gaulle Airport, each carrying passengers who appeared ordinary. Businessmen in pressed suits, a tourist couple with guidebooks, a young backpacker thumbing through Eurail timetables. In reality, They were operatives of Mossad's Caesarea unit, traveling under carefully constructed aliases supported by layers of forged passports. The arrivals were staggered to avoid suspicion. One team entered from Zurich, another from Rome, a third from Brussels. Each carried minimal luggage, just enough to blend into their assumed identities. Surveillance tradecraft dictated they never met openly, never lingered in proximity. Instead, they communicated through dead drops and coded phone calls routed through disposable SIM cards purchased in cash. Khobani's own journey had been mapped weeks earlier. Israeli intelligence tracked his movements through a web of informants and intercepted calls. He was scheduled to board the TGV from Paris to Lyon, a route chosen for its anonymity. For Mossad, this presented opportunity, a moving target. Far from Hamas's protective networks, surrounded by civilians whose presence could mask operational movements. Paris, with its labyrinthine streets and international air traffic, provided the perfect stage. Operatives melted into the city's background, rehearsing tailing maneuvers and memorizing station layouts. Their goal was simple but exacting: converge silently on the same train carriage as Ibrahim Khobani, without raising the faintest suspicion. Every detail, from ticket purchase to seating arrangement, had been pre-calculated. By the time Khobani settled into his seat, sipping tea and gazing at the French countryside, the walls of an invisible trap had already begun to close around him. In Paris, the operatives dispersed into the city's anonymous hotels, careful to avoid patterns. One agent checked into a modest 2-star near Gare du Nord, another into a business hotel along Boulevard Saint-Michel, while a third rented a short-stay apartment under a corporate front. Their rooms contained nothing remarkable, no weapons, no incriminating documents, only innocuous luggage and prepaid calling cards. To housekeeping staff, they were indistinguishable from tourists. Surveillance was their true weapon. Khobani, though cautious, had made one critical miscalculation. He trusted the bustle of Paris to shield him. He frequented a small café near Place d'Italie, ordered mint tea, and paid in cash. Mossad trackers noted his habits, never staying more than 20 minutes, always sitting near a window. Each routine was logged, mapped, and studied. By the time he purchased his TGV ticket, the operatives already knew his departure gate, carriage, and seat number. To maintain cover, surveillance teams rotated constantly. No single operative shadowed Khobani for more than a short interval. Instead, the baton passed seamlessly in metro stations, crowded boulevards, and busy lobbies. Cameras hidden in briefcases captured his gait, his clothing, his companions. The collected footage confirmed what analysts in Tel Aviv suspected. Khobani was traveling alone, without visible protection. The final surveillance check came the night before the operation. A female operative posing as a tourist followed him into Gare de Lyon, feigning confusion as she examined timetables. She confirmed his reservation, carriage 7, window seat. A coded call was placed to a number in Brussels. A single phrase delivered the verdict: "The watchmaker will ride alone." With that, the mission advanced to its irreversible stage. On the morning of 14th of March 1997, Paris bustled with its usual rhythm, oblivious to the invisible drama unfolding at Gare de Lyon. Travelers dragged rolling suitcases across marble floors, announcements echoed through the vaulted ceilings, and the TGV bound for Lyon idled at the platform with its doors open. Among the stream of passengers was Ibrahim Khobani, dressed plainly in a gray jacket, carrying a single leather briefcase. To most, he looked like another businessman on a routine journey. To Mossad operatives shadowing him, he was the centerpiece of an operation rehearsed to the second. 2 agents boarded the train ahead of him, blending into the crowd. One positioned himself in carriage 6, the other in carriage 8, forming bookends around Khobani's assigned seat in carriage 7. A third operative, disguised as a student with headphones, slipped into the same carriage, seating himself 2 rows behind the target. Each agent carried nothing that would betray their purpose, only the tools of subtle execution concealed in everyday items. Khobani settled by the window, his ticket clipped by the conductor, unaware of the tightening noose. As the train accelerated southward, operatives monitored his movements with casual precision. He sipped tea purchased from the onboard cafe, glanced occasionally at documents from his briefcase, and stared out at the blur of the French countryside. At predetermined intervals, Agents rotated proximity, one briefly passing down the aisle, another rising to adjust luggage. Every movement was choreographed to appear natural, a dance invisible to other passengers. The female operative who had confirmed his reservation the night before now sat across the aisle, flipping through a novel but watching him through peripheral vision. As the train raced beyond Dijon, the order was silently confirmed via encrypted pager. Proceed. The moment was chosen for maximum concealment, far from stations, surrounded by the monotony of countryside. The operatives prepared for the decisive act, knowing that within minutes, Khobani's fate would be sealed without a single passenger realizing they had been part of a theater of assassination. The instruments of Ibrahim Khobani's death were chosen with the precision of a surgeon's scalpel. Mossad operatives carried no guns, no grenades, nothing that would create spectacle or panic inside a crowded carriage. Instead, their arsenal consisted of items that could pass unnoticed in a traveler's bag: a modified fountain pen, a medical injector disguised as an asthma inhaler, and a small vial concealed in a contact lens case. Each was designed for subtlety, for efficiency, for the art of a death mistaken as natural. The chosen method was toxin delivery. French forensic teams would later suspect a fast-acting cardiac agent, possibly digitoxin or a synthetic variation, capable of inducing heart failure without leaving immediate trace. The inhaler-like device allowed the poison to be administered in a single discreet spray, directed at Khobani as he leaned forward to adjust his briefcase. The act required only seconds, easily masked by the shuffle of passengers and the sway of the train. A secondary backup existed. The pen concealed a retractable microneedle, intended to inject the same toxin into fabric, food, or even the skin with a casual brush. Yet redundancy was rarely needed in such operations. The watchmaker, master of timers and fuses, would be undone by chemistry more silent than his own craft. Once delivered, the toxin's effect was predictable. Khobani shifted uncomfortably, his breathing shallow, his gaze unfocused. To fellow passengers, he appeared fatigued, perhaps travel-sick. Within minutes, his head tilted toward the window, the countryside flashing past his reflection as his pulse weakened. Mossad had achieved what it prided itself on: an invisible strike, clean, clinical, and deniable. For the operatives, the moments after the toxin was delivered stretched into an eternity. Every cough from Khobani, every shift of his posture, risked drawing attention. The female agent across the aisle feigned concentration on her novel, though her eyes tracked every twitch of his hand. Behind him, the supposed student tapped his headphones in rhythm with music that was not playing, silently counting the seconds until the chemical took hold. At one point, a conductor paused beside Khobani to check tickets once more. For a heartbeat, it seemed as though the target might stir, speak, or betray awareness of what had just occurred. Instead, Khobani merely exhaled heavily, as though surrendering to exhaustion. The conductor clipped a ticket 2 rows back and moved on. The moment passed, the cover held. Another passenger, an elderly man, leaned across to ask Khobani the time. No answer came. The silence was interpreted as disinterest, but for the agents it was the confirmation that their window had closed successfully. The danger now was not in failure, but in exposure. The operation demanded calm exit, no hasty moves, no ripples in the surface of ordinary travel. Death had to appear as sleep. By the time the TGV sliced through the rolling hills toward Lyon, Ibrahim Khobani's body had already surrendered. His breathing slowed into irregular spasms before stopping altogether. To fellow passengers, it looked like the fatigue of a weary traveler who had dozed off against the window. His briefcase rested neatly at his feet, his ticket still visible in the pocket of his jacket. Nothing appeared out of place. The female operative across the aisle shifted her gaze once more, closing her book as though preparing to nap. Behind him, the student removed his headphones, checked his watch, and quietly disembarked at the next stop. The choreography unfolded flawlessly, each operative peeling away, leaving only the illusion of an ordinary death. When the train pulled into Lyon station, attendants attempted to rouse the silent passenger. Their efforts yielded only cold stillness. Paramedics declared him dead on the spot, citing suspected cardiac arrest. No alarms, no pursuit, no visible violence. Mossad had staged a masterpiece of deniability. An execution wrapped in the guise of natural fate. The watchmaker, whose devices had claimed scores of lives, had himself been undone by an invisible weapon, extinguished without a trace in the anonymity of transit. When attendants in Lyon tried to rouse the silent passenger, they expected little more than a grumble of protest from a man lulled into slumber by the motion of the train. Instead, their gentle taps met with chilling stillness. The man's skin was pale, his eyes half open yet unresponsive, his chest unmoving. Shock rippled through the carriage as passengers realized they had traveled beside death without noticing. Paramedics boarded swiftly, their equipment wheeled down narrow aisles. They checked his pulse, attempted resuscitation, and pronounced the obvious. The passenger was gone. Papers inside his jacket identified him as Ibrahim Khobani, a name that sparked immediate recognition among intelligence officers summoned to the station. This was no ordinary traveler. This was Hamas's elusive bomb maker, long sought by Mossad and monitored by agencies across Europe. The discovery stunned French authorities. A politically sensitive figure had died under mysterious circumstances on their soil, in plain sight, during a routine train ride. Was it natural causes or something darker? Investigators cordoned off the carriage, but whispers had already begun. A man so hunted could not simply die by chance. What unfolded next would transform a quiet death into a storm of suspicion. Khobani's body was transferred under heavy escort to a forensic institute in Lyon, where French pathologists began the delicate task of uncovering the truth. At first glance, the findings supported a simple narrative. No gunshot wounds, no signs of struggle, no obvious trauma. His heart had stopped, the cause seemingly natural, yet the absence of explanation was itself suspicious. Microscopic analysis revealed anomalies. His cardiac tissue showed irregularities inconsistent with a typical heart attack. Toxicology screens, though initially inconclusive, hinted at the presence of compounds rarely encountered in standard examinations. The chemical traces were faint, almost ghostly, as if engineered to vanish before detection. Experts debated whether they were residuals of digoxin or a synthetic cousin, agents capable of inducing heart failure within minutes. The ambiguity frustrated French investigators. Official reports leaned towards sudden cardiac arrest, but privately doctors admitted unease. The body bore no marks of injection, no evidence of self-administered drugs. To intelligence analysts observing from Paris and Tel Aviv, the conclusion was clear. A poison had been deployed with surgical precision, leaving behind a forensic riddle. The autopsy answered little, but it ignited the central question. Had France just hosted a natural death, or an international assassination dressed in medical ambiguity? In the days following Khobani's death, French investigators scoured Lyon and Paris for clues. Surveillance tapes from Gare de Lyon revealed fragments of shadowy movements. A young man with a backpack loitering near carriage 7, a woman with a paperback adjusting her seat across the aisle, a business traveler who disembarked one stop before the body was discovered. None appeared remarkable at first glance. Yet when investigators cross-referenced passenger lists, inconsistencies emerged. Several names matched no real identities. The passports used for boarding were later revealed to be expertly forged, bearing the hallmarks of professional tradecraft. The scandal deepened when European authorities traced some of the forged passports back to countries like Canada, New Zealand, and the United Kingdom. Each government, when notified, denied any knowledge of their citizens being involved, pointing instead to the likelihood of Mossad's long-standing practice of identity theft. Diplomats summoned Israeli ambassadors, demanding explanations. Publicly, Tel Aviv remained silent. Privately, officials shrugged at the outrage, knowing the evidence was circumstantial and denials would suffice. French newspapers splashed headlines of "Assassination on the TGV," igniting speculation that Paris had been used as a chessboard by foreign intelligence. For France, the revelation was humiliating. Not only had a wanted militant died under their jurisdiction, but foreign operatives had moved seamlessly through their transport hubs using counterfeit documents. The passport scandal became the most visible crack in the cover story. It suggested orchestration far beyond coincidence. To intelligence professionals, the signs were unmistakable. The operation bore the fingerprints of Mossad, calculated, deniable, but never entirely invisible. France was left holding the embarrassment, while Israel neither confirmed nor denied what everyone already suspected. The diplomatic aftershocks of Khobani's death rippled swiftly across capitals. In Gaza, Hamas declared him a martyr, parading his image alongside Yahya Ayyash, claiming his death proved Israel's fear of Palestinian ingenuity. Crowds filled streets, chanting vows of revenge, their fury directed at both Tel Aviv and the European states that, by inaction, had allowed the assassination to occur. France, caught in the crossfire, faced humiliation. Newspapers accused its intelligence services of incompetence, unable to protect sovereignty or detect a covert strike on its soil. Opposition politicians demanded inquiries, while the government summoned Israel's ambassador for clarification. The response was predictably evasive. Israel neither confirmed nor denied involvement, citing its right to defend citizens against terror. Elsewhere, the scandal strained alliances. Britain and New Zealand lodged formal complaints about the misuse of forged passports tied to their countries. Canada threatened temporary restrictions on intelligence sharing. These gestures, however, were largely symbolic. Behind closed doors, Western intelligence services admitted a grudging admiration for the precision of the operation. In Washington, officials issued muted statements condemning terrorism in all forms, while avoiding direct blame. The unspoken reality was that Khobani's removal aligned with American interests. His expertise represented a threat not only to Israel, but to broader regional stability. The fallout underscored a paradox. Governments publicly decried violations of law, yet privately acknowledged that shadow wars respected no borders. Khobani's death exposed a truth many preferred to leave unspoken. That state power often thrives in deniability, and assassinations are judged not by legality, but by effectiveness. In the corridors of intelligence, the mission was quietly labeled a success. Behind the precision of Ibrahim Khobani's assassination lay a machinery seldom glimpsed by the public. The phantom bureaucracy of espionage. It is a bureaucracy without office towers or letterheads, an empire of locked filing cabinets, encrypted faxes, and voices that speak only through intermediaries. In Tel Aviv, the Mossad directorate functioned not as a monolith but as a hive, each division compartmentalized, each officer knowing only fragments of the whole. To the outside world it appeared invisible. To those within it was a living organism, breathing secrecy. Authorizations did not travel through parliament or courtroom. They traveled across secure lines, from ministerial offices to operational desks, punctuated by code phrases and initials rather than signatures. Layers of plausible deniability were built into every page of planning. If the operation succeeded, a quiet nod sufficed. If it failed, no trace pointed upward. This was bureaucracy weaponized, a system designed not for accountability, but for disappearance. It was within this shadow structure that Khobani's name was filed, tagged, and elevated from priority subject to elimination order. Behind closed doors, analysts sifted intercepted calls, logisticians booked flights under false identities, chemists calibrated toxins with laboratory precision. All of it emerged from a faceless network of clerks, case officers, and analysts whose names will never appear in print. The bureaucracy itself became the assassin, an empire without borders, whispering death through the sterile hum of fluorescent-lit offices. Beneath the phantom bureaucracy operated the invisible legions, units whispered about like myth, their names spoken only in corridors lined with soundproofing. Caesarea, the operational wing, produced field operatives whose disguises shifted like theater masks: student, tourist, diplomat, lover. Kaidan, the fabled assassination unit, trained men and women to kill with syringes, silenced pistols, and poisons indistinguishable from natural causes. Each cell moved as though guided by fate, though in truth it was doctrine drilled to perfection. They were profiled like archetypes: the watcher, trained to trail targets through crowded markets without a single eye contact; the weaver, responsible for building false identities from forged passports and fabricated backstories; the hand, skilled in delivering death with one subtle gesture. Together they formed the unseen armies of modern statecraft, soldiers without uniforms, medals, or public funerals. Their myth grew with each operation. Whispers of missions in Amman, Dubai, Damascus, And now Lyon painted them less as mortals and more as shades, always present, never caught, feared even by allies. For Hamas, they were demons haunting every safe house. For Israel, they were guardians hidden in plain sight. In reality, they were professionals, bound not by glory, but by paperwork and silence. The assassination of Ibrahim Khobani was not an isolated act, but part of a lineage, echoes of missions carried out in the long shadows of Cold War and Middle Eastern strife. In Lillehammer, 1973, operatives gunned down a Moroccan waiter in Norway, mistaking him for a Black September commander. The mission unraveled into scandal, its ghosts haunting Mossad for decades. In Tunis, 1988, Khalil al-Wazir, Abu Jihad, PLO's military mastermind, was executed in his villa, his family awakened by the muffled sounds of suppressed gunfire. The world condemned, yet the operation became a textbook example of surgical elimination. In Amman, 1997, an attempt to kill Khaled Mashal with poison disguised as medication nearly spiraled into disaster when Jordanian guards caught the agents red-handed. Only frantic diplomacy and the delivery of an antidote spared Israel from crippling fallout. Each mission, whether flawless or flawed, added to the mythos of a service that thrived in ambiguity, its victories broadcast in silence, its failures etched into history. Khobani's death on a French train fit seamlessly into this gallery of ghosts. A moving carriage replaced villas and alleyways, but the principle remained unchanged. Shadows stepping into the lives of men marked for death, vanishing before the world grasped what had occurred. At the highest tier, decisions about life and death were not made in dimly lit safe houses, but in polished government chambers. Prime ministers and intelligence chiefs, cloaked in authority, played the role of gods behind the curtain. They weighed dossiers like scales of justice, then tipped them toward elimination with a nod. Yet these puppet masters were flawed, human, driven by politics, fear, and ambition. In the end, their signatures unleashed operatives who vanished into crowds, leaving only corpses and denials. Power, in their hands, was less about visibility and more about the ability to erase without trace. When Ibrahim Khobani's body was returned to Gaza, it was draped in green flags of Hamas and carried aloft through the narrow streets of Khan Yunis. Thousands gathered, their chants echoing through the refugee camp, where he had once been a quiet boy dismantling radios. His coffin, borne on the shoulders of militants in black masks, became more than a vessel of death. It was a symbol of defiance, proof that even hunted men could achieve martyrdom in the eyes of their people. The funeral doubled as a rally. Hamas leaders declared his death a cowardly assassination and vowed retaliation. Children clutched posters of Khobani beside Yahya Ayyash, placing him in the pantheon of fallen engineers. Women ululated from balconies as volleys of gunfire cracked skyward. For Israel, the procession was a reminder that eliminating an individual rarely extinguished the ideology he embodied. For France, embarrassed by the operation on its soil, the images broadcast worldwide underscored its inability to prevent foreign intelligence from shaping events within its borders. In that moment, Khobani's death achieved paradoxical power, silencing his hands but amplifying his legend. The watchmaker was gone, yet the ticking of his story reverberated across Gaza's charged air. In the months that followed, Khobani's absence reshaped the battlefield in subtle yet profound ways. Hamas scrambled to fill the void he left, elevating younger engineers whose skills were promising but inconsistent. Bombings continued, but many devices failed or detonated prematurely, underscoring the precision that had died with him. Within Israel, intelligence briefings cited a measurable drop in the sophistication of attacks, though officials warned that his disciples would eventually refine their craft. Geopolitically, the assassination hardened positions. Hamas doubled down on militancy, citing Khobani's death as proof that negotiations were futile. Israel, emboldened by the operation's success, leaned deeper into its doctrine of targeted killings, setting a precedent for the coming decades. France and other European states quietly tightened surveillance on exiled militants, wary of becoming the next stage for foreign assassinations. Yet the most lasting consequence was psychological. Within Gaza, Khobani became myth, his face painted on murals, his story taught to recruits as inspiration. In Israeli intelligence circles, his elimination was celebrated but also studied, proof of Mossad's reach. but also a reminder of how many resources one man could consume. The Shadow War had claimed its prize, but it promised no final peace. In the end, Ibrahim Khobani's death changed little in the grand scheme of geopolitics. The conflict raged on, bombs continued to echo through city streets, and the cycle of vengeance endured. Yet his assassination revealed something chilling: the hidden architecture of state power, where governments sanction invisible killers, and borders offer no sanctuary. The watchmaker's devices may have fallen silent, but his story exposed a world where lives are reduced to dossiers, where silence is engineered as carefully as explosions, and where the truth remains forever buried, not in graves, but in shadows.